Yes, it definitely does require a lot of empathy. You have to put your heart and soul and feelings into the person that you're writing about. And at some point, you almost bring yourself to tears thinking, oh, if this had really happened the way you wrote it. And I'm sure there's a lot more in that man's life than I could ever dig into. But I had to, just like I said, you have to come up with imagination and think of how things may have occurred and how they may have happened.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Author Spotlight brought to you by Apex Media Global. I'm your host, Monica, and I'm sitting down today with Dawn Roland, and also known as Shannon Whitford. She is the author of two powerful books, Without Family Ties and Unfathomable, that explore what it means to survive, to feel alone, and to just keep going anyway. Her stories are raw, honest, and full of heart, and are not afraid of exploring the gruesome details of humanness and what's actually going on out there. And I'm really looking forward to understanding the stories behind the story. So, Dawn, Shannon, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, I'm glad to be here.
And I'm glad you're here. So, I probably assume that you get this question a lot, but what made you come up with the name Shannon Whitford?
Okay, well, my grandfather's family is originally from near Shannon, Ireland, and he talked about his family occasionally from being from there. And I've had an opportunity to get to Ireland. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to Shannon, and I wish I had just so I could see where I came from. But I just thought the name was so pretty. And Whitford came from the street I grew up on, and my mother lived there for 62 years. So I was used to using the word Whitford. So that's where Shannon Whitford came from.
That's a beautiful name. But what made you get out of that Shannon Whitford persona and actually introduce yourself as Dawn Roland, the author?
Well, when I initially wrote both books, one was rather graphic and the other one was kind of gruesome, I'd say. And I don't know, some people look at you like, oh, you wrote that book. That's a, some of the stuff in there isn't very nice or whatever their feeling is towards the book. I didn't want people looking at me and thinking I was the people, the person in the book. I'm just a storyteller like all the other authors are. And I just didn't want to be associated with some of the people in the book, in the books.
Hmm.
I wanted to be remain me and Shannon remain separate. But as people got that know me, that got to read the books and pass them on and say, oh, this is my cousin or this is my friend, I was always Dawn Roland and not Shannon. So I just decided to expose my real name.
How long did it take for you to be finally comfortable with exposing your real name?
Somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years, it just Shannon just kind of went by the wayside. I not quite sure why, but I wrote both of my books in the early one in 2010, one in 2013, being 12 years ago, the last one. So um, I'm not sure exactly at what point I decided to feel comfortable with letting people know that that was me, but I know it's been in the last 4 or 5 years.
Hmm. And I'm glad you made that decision. But I really want to talk about your books as well and also understand your thought process behind it, especially Without Family Ties. Really, really interesting. It moved through distinct, very, very distinct eras like 1940s London, the Korean War, and the 1970s rock scene. How did you approach writing those time periods authentically? Did you rely more on research or just like your memory?
A lot of it was memory. my father was in the Air Force, and he told a story about this man who had this son who became a rock star. And I just ran with it. I can't tell you how I came up with all the ideas, but I just ran with it. And my father knew the man well. He was in the Air Force with him, but my father never really met the son. And the story is very similar. Of course, it wouldn't be fiction if I told the truth. So I, moved things around, and some of those things that happened in the book were true happenings, not necessarily in the order that they happened. The fact that they went to Boston to see the band play for the first time, that all happened. And my father went with his friend to meet his son. And I guess it didn't happen the way I depicted it, but it did happen somewhere in the same, like he got to meet him, but it wasn't the way that it happened in the book. And my father couldn't tell me a whole lot. Had been a couple years, and it wasn't his son, it was this man's son. So he said, he couldn't remember everything that happened. So I just, like I said, I just ran with it. And I know that this son had been married a couple times and had a couple children, and he had a pretty lucrative um, rock air band. And so, like I said, I just ran with the story and just made it as I went. But I know that from being from that era, a lot of the happenings were happening with all the bands. And so I just put it into play with one band.
Wow. Wow. Um,
The lot of imagination went into that book. Uh, a lot of well, if I were this person, how would I have done it? Or if this had happened to me, how would I have thought about it? What would I have done? How would I have reacted? So that's what I did. I put myself in that man's place.
it's interesting that you said that and how, as an author, you would imagine how a person would behave. It's almost like creating a person as well, but I would imagine you would it would require a lot of empathy to be an author
It,
because you're right.
yes, it definitely does require a lot of empathy. You have to put your heart and soul and feelings into the person that you're writing about. And at some point, you almost bring yourself to tears thinking, oh, if this had really happened the way you wrote it. And I'm sure there's a lot more in that man's life than I could ever dig into. But I had to, just like I said, you have to come up with imagination and think of how things may have occurred and how they may have happened. And you also have to think of what's going to interest your audience, because the mundane everyday happenings wouldn't draw an audience. So you have to let them know that a lot of people don't live the mundane everyday activities that the average person does.
Yeah. Wow. Um, that gave me a new perspective. When you think of authors, you think about how creative they are and they create all of these scenarios and characters and tie the whole thing together. But when you said it, it made me realize that it also requires a lot of emotional intelligence and empathy to understand how a character might feel like because they're not always a piece of you. They're a completely different person. And now I want to ask you, while you were creating or you were going through these storylines and trying to build that character and make it fictional and add parts of you, did you ever discover something about yourself along the way? Like, what about the inward empathy that you felt for yourself?
I don't know that I felt any empathy for myself. I felt more empathy for people who taught me. I had people in school who had a teacher in school who told me that I looked at things so much differently when I was told to do a book report. Boy, you look outside the box. And then I had a teacher who told me that I'd never amount to anything. So I'd like to take those two teachers together and combine them and say, well, look at what I did. And the teacher who said, you look outside the box, look how creative I've become. To the other teacher, I'd like to say, well, maybe I didn't become anything in your eyes, but to me, I've written a book. And then eventually wrote two books, and I had ideas for other books, but I think at this point in my life, I'm giving up on that. But anyhow, I did put myself into much on the second book, really, much more into the second book because it's actually written about an actual happening. Um, when in 2013, there were three women from Ohio who escaped a captor, and one of the girls had a child to this captor. Um, I followed them quite closely for the first 6 months after they got out of their captivity, and they were telling their story and how horrible some of the gruesome details that these women went through, some of the gruesome things these women went through, the details I took and ran with and wrote the second book, Unfathomable. I found myself putting myself in their place, and that's how my second book came to be. Um, Even though the cruise to the Baltic really did happen, and my family and I went, I just had to find a way to use the horrible details that these women went through and put it into a book because I just felt so sorry for those girls. And the empathy was really more in the second book than the first one.
Yeah.
The first one was more of a fun thing to try and see if I could do it. The second one was because I had a story to tell.
Mm. Yeah, quite a jump from Without Family Ties to Unfathomable. Now that you've mentioned it, I would really like to explore Unfathomable a little deeper. So, this story came about during your trip to Sweden when you almost missed your return bus, right? And then you were thinking about all the horrendous things that would happen to a woman. So now you mentioned the stories in Ohio. Did the story came first, and then when you were in Sweden, you kind of thought back to what happened in Ohio? Was that it?
No, actually, we were in Sweden first, and I actually
Mhm.
almost did miss a bus in the town of Sigtuna. I stopped to use the restroom, and when I came out, I didn't realize that I was the topic on the bus. Where is she? We got to go. We told everyone to be here by 11 o'clock, and she's not back, and we've got to go. And a man stopped me and said, "Hey, come in my store and take a look at some of the things I have." And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't. My bus is ready to leave. I got to go." And then I looked at my bus and I saw a woman who I didn't really know very well. I had interacted with her a few times on the cruise, but she's signaling to me to hurry, hurry. So I ran back to the bus and took my seat. And my husband says, "You don't know how close you came to missing your bus." So at that point, um, my son, who joked about me writing my first book, said, "You ought to write another book. You almost got left behind. You could tell a real story about what might have happened." Well, when these three women became abducted or became released from their abduction a year later, I put the two of them together and created a story. And even though nothing of the second part of that book has ever happened to me, and I don't know much about the story of the women other than they were abducted for 10 years and one had given birth to their captor. Um, I don't know a lot about it. So I just became creative and the story just evolved.
So the story that was inspired by the women abducted in Ohio, it was more research based, would you
Yes.
say? Yes. Um, so Unfathomable follows the story of Marcia, right? She was on her
Yeah.
dream
And that's
holiday.
what my I have a cousin, Marcia, and all my cousins said that her and I looked a lot alike, and they confused me a couple times with her. So that's how I became Marcia.
Right. Right. It's all coming together. Wow. So when you were writing Marcia, was she separate from you, or did you embody her while you were writing Unfathomable?
It's hard not to embody someone like that when, part of the story was true. Like I said, the trip to the Baltic really did happen, and we did plan it almost a year in advance. And so it was long way, long coming to get to that point. And we toured several countries, but I wasn't almost left behind in any of the other countries. I was almost left behind in Sweden. So therefore, I used that as a starting point for the rest of my story. Um, like I said, my son said, "Oh, you ought to write a story about almost getting left behind." However, at the time, it was like, "Oh yeah, okay, fine." But then when these women were abducted, and I wanted to tell their story without telling it, without they probably went. I felt they went through enough. I wasn't going to call them and interview them or talk to them. I just imagined, from the things I read about these women, about how horrible it was, about the area that they were kept in, the way they were fed and taken care of. I just used that with my imagination with that part and told my story about what happened, what could happen if someone becomes abducted.
Yeah. And it's much more, I think, the reaction is much more visceral as a woman, like imagining another woman going through something like that and being tortured, held captive, and bearing the child of your abductor. That's something unimaginable, unfathomable, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah. And Marcia's husband, his reaction, it got a lot of mixed reactions. Like when he kind of assumed that Marcia was dead. Um, so how did you build Marcia's husband as a character?
Well, I guess maybe I watched too much TV, but I watched these men respond to their missing spouses, and a lot of them in the beginning don't want to believe there's anything wrong with the woman. Oh, she got upset with me, or yeah, she does this occasionally. So they seem rather calm in the beginning, and then they, when reality hits, then they become more emotional. I know I've seen the opposite also, but I went with that personal scenario that, well, they'll be okay, they'll return, everything's okay. And then when they don't get back, then they start showing their fears and their concerns. I know in the case of Dale in the book, he knew that Marcia would was probably okay, and well, because she was left behind, it was her fault, and she'd find her way to the ship. And he figured, well, we've traveled, we're experienced travelers, she'll figure it out. But when she didn't, then he became concerned.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it's a realistic portrayal of the character. And I don't want to really spoil it, but the ending was quite happy despite everything that went on. And I want to know more about the abductor side. Like, what do you think happened to them? Or what would happen to them? Or what would their backstory be of why some people just do gruesome things like that?
Well, I'd like to think that my abductor in particular just got stuck in a rut, and he didn't know how to get himself out of it. But I do believe some abductors want control. And my abductor definitely wanted that control when he was there, but he also didn't want to, he had other living to do. And I was just a bothersome thing that he had to take care of. I wasn't Marcia, I should say. Marcia was a distraction. He was sorry he got involved. He probably would never have done that again. But what I think would probably have happened to him in the end is he probably would have had gotten caught and maybe gone through a trial and served a jail sentence. But I don't know. I didn't care. Marcia just wanted to go home. She
Mm.
just wanted to go back and return to her everyday living and try to put the past behind her. So whether or not she delved into the past, we'll never know because that's just the way it was. I
Yeah.
don't want to give away the ending of the book either, so we won't go any further than that.
Yeah. It's for the readers to find out, but um
Right.
you didn't spare any details. You didn't shy away from the actual horrific things that happened to Marcia. And while you were writing that, how did you regulate your own emotions? Again, especially as a woman.
It was tough at times. The one scene that sticks out in my mind is the scene where the abductor threw a mattress over top of her and tried smothering her. Um, I'm sitting in my chair writing this and thinking, what are you writing? Why would you write that? Because that's a horrible thing. But then I got thinking to myself, this probably has happened more than once. And I mean, there's a big world out there and people do crazy things. So I thought, well, I'm going to go with it because I'm to the point where I feel that even if it never did happen, it could happen and it's a possibility. And like I said, you want to keep your audience at their peak. And that definitely to me was a turning point in the book, realizing that horrible things like that happen. No matter how someone dies, they're smothered, they're choked, they're stabbed, they're whatever. That was going to be her demise, even though it didn't turn out to be. But I imagined that being her demise, being having a mattress thrown over her and someone laying on her and suffocating her. She was a strong-willed person. Marcia was very strong-willed, and she was not letting anything get in her way. She was going to
Mm.
get through this somehow.
Yeah. And I think on the topic of empathy, when you read about Marcia, you kind of feel like, oh, poor Marcia. You feel sad for Marcia, but I think empathy is also appreciating their strong will and their resilience. And I think that's another way of looking at the story instead of like shying away from all the bad things that happened to actually appreciate the strength of a woman being alone and going through all of that and still like getting out, you know? Um, so thank you for writing that book. And again, it's a real thing that people go through, and you really didn't shy away from it. But was there a moment where you were like, oh, maybe this is too much, or I don't know if I should write about this? What made you decide that this is a story that I have to tell and I have to put it out there?
Well, I wasn't sure I wanted to write the second book, even though I in the Baltic, and I told myself, oh, people aren't going to want to hear this. It's nothing exciting. And then I kind of sat for maybe 2 or 3 months and didn't move on the book. And then one day I thought, well, this is crazy. You started a book, you have to sit down and finish it because you have a lot of time into this. So I decided that after I read about the women that were abducted, that I was going to do a little bit of research. I was going to follow their activities on TV, and they didn't get into gruesome details. They really didn't. The little bit you could find out on the internet was what I call mildly aggravating or disgusting, but it wasn't horrific. Um, so you could tell by watching them that they just weren't telling the whole story on TV. And I felt that in honor of what they had gone through, that I needed to complete this book because there are people all over the world, I'm sure, suffering like that, eventually the story comes out and you find out about it. So I thought, well, I'm going to complete my book and I'm going to write what I think may have happened. Um, it's really hard to put yourself in there and have empathy for yourself and have empathy for the abductor, because the abductor is the bad guy. So you don't want to have empathy for him, even though at points in the book, Marcia actually had empathy for him because she knew he was struggling and she didn't know why he wasn't sharing any information. So I found myself thinking, this poor guy, he doesn't want to take care of me, but he is taking care of me. Or Marcia, he's not, doesn't want to take care of Marcia, but he is taking care of her. And doesn't want to kill her. He doesn't want to do away with her, but yet he doesn't know what to do with her. So at that point, I felt myself empathetic for him. Um, Marcia, on the other hand, um, was a fighter. She struggled constantly with her captivity. She did not have any indication, didn't show any indication at any point that she was concerned about death, just that she didn't want to be captive anymore. She wanted to be free. And she was almost to the point where she felt that she had to accept her situation. And at some point, if the opportunity arose, she was doing well for her. Never ended up well for her, but she was a victim, a serious victim. And the whole story was because I didn't want to, I was tired of writing. I didn't want to complete the book, but yet I found something I wanted to talk about. So that gave me a reason to complete the book.
And I think you perfectly captured the true essence of a woman that um they despite everything or despite being wrong, they still have the heart to feel empathy still. But that doesn't mean that they're going to accept what happened to them. They're going to break out of it and they're still going to remain resilient. So I'm really glad that you finished the book. And also, I think, at least my own perspective, I don't think the book is just about surviving physically, but also emotionally. So, how did you find the balance or like the inner strength to capture that or to convey that?
Not sure I have an answer for that, but I think I needed to make her strong-willed, and I needed to make her someone that other people wanted to follow. They wanted to know what happened to her. Um, Audiences don't want to hear the every day. Oh well, that's just the way it is. That book is not the way it is. It's not the way it's supposed to be. So I found myself trying to uh, break into the not everyday scene and still showing strength and wisdom and uh, power and I want to say gutlessness. She was, she was gutty. She really was. She got out there and she stood up and had lots of guts. So she was a brave soul. I'd like to see myself be as brave as she is.
Mm.
But maybe that's where some of the balance came from because I know I'm strong-willed, but I don't know that I would be that strong-willed.
Oh, you would absolutely be, but I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. Um, so you're unfathomable, or even without family ties. Your books hold space for pain and leave room for healing as well. So when you mentioned that you kind of want to write a character who people would want to follow, so my question is, do you think of your writing or your stories as a way to help others, or is it something that's personal to you?
It's a little bit of both. If people read either of the books, they can see where the characters are brave. Um, they're honest people who just want to be normal, even though in both books the situations are not normal. Um, with un, Without family ties, even though it's about a rock star, and it's also about a father who, a father and a mother, I should say, but more so the father who doesn't want to be disappointed, and a rock star who doesn't know maybe the correct way to live. He's pushed into a lot of things that not he's not sure of. His life is always a question, and I think he would just like some normalcy. And by getting involved with other family members, that's what he's looking to do. But yet, I think he's afraid. I really think there's a fear there. And to write about a person like that, you have to look at what a lot of the rock stars went through in the 70s. And you heard these stories about how things happened to them. And I didn't want that to happen to my character. I didn't want my character to have the demise of a lot of the rock stars of the 70s. So I made him where he actually showed some empathy and concern for his followers. It's really difficult to write a book and put all the things into it that you're feeling and still not you can't always get all the points across even though you want to. It's really hard to get everything into a book, and the book could be 1,000 pages and you still wouldn't get everything into it that you really want to share. So it's a matter of pick and choose.
Yeah. And how do you know which one to pick and choose?
Again, that's another difficult question. I don't know that you do know which ones to pick and choose. It just comes down to um, which one suits the moment that you're writing about. Um, there are times where you question, maybe I should write this in or take that out. But bottom line, you just have to go with what's in your heart, what you're feeling at the time that you're writing it.
Hmm. And what's in your heart now, Dawn? Like, do you think that you want to write another book, another story that you want to explore? Maybe Marsha, after everything, the post-traumatic growth. What's next? What's in your heart?
Well, I tell you, I was going to write another book about a local hillside that was flooded in the 70s, and they found some strange and unique things in this hillside. And I was actually going to write a book about it. I don't believe anyone has, but I think I've lost my desire to sit down and um, try to come up with ideas again. Um, even though I have a solid base to start this third book, you still have to be creative. You still have to come up with characters, and you have to come up with times and dates and places. And putting it all together, I think, is more involved than I really want to get anymore. I understand there's writers out there who write all their life, and that's what they do. But I don't know that I am what I consider a full writer. I think I had stories to tell, and I wanted to tell them with my other two books, and I don't know that this is a story that I really want to get involved with it. The thought process is there. I just have to push myself to do it if I'm going to do it. But that would be my final book for sure. If I do go that step. And I have thought about writing another story about Marcia's next 20 years, but then yet I think, well, it's like a lot of movies that just end and you don't even know exactly what's happening at the end. It just ends, you know. And I thought, well, that's pretty much, we'll just leave it where it is.
Bittersweet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I guess you're doing your picking and choosing now and picking and choosing what stories to tell and when to do it and when to stop. But I really, really hope, at least selfishly, I hope that you're gonna come up with another book because um I really like how you capture the heart and it's raw, and it's unafraid, the gutsy, right? Like you were mentioning.
right.
Yeah. So Dawn, before I let you go, I do have a segment that I do. I have three scenarios where I'm curious, what would Dawn do? So the first question is, let's say that you want to write something super raw and personal, I mean, unfathomable, but let's say that someone is saying like it's too dark. Um, it's too triggering to publish. What would Dawn do?
Well, the first thing I tell people, they felt it was dark, don't read it. If you're uncomfortable with it, stop reading it because I'm going to write it anyhow if it's something I feel I have that much passion about. And I don't think there's any other way to describe it. It's got to be a passion. It's got to be a feeling. So I would just tell people if they don't like the darkness, don't read it.
Perfect answer. So the second scenario is, let's say that someone from your past saw themselves in your book and thought that, oh my God, this is about me. And then they get upset. What would Dawn do?
Well, I would tell them that they should be privileged that I wrote about them, even though I didn't. If they want to believe that, that's up to them. I would not write a book about anyone and use their name or anything that they could connect to their life. Um, with the exception of this friend of my dad's that knew that this book was taking place. But I used his scenario, but I didn't use much of himself, who he was, his true being. So that would be the closest I ever came to using anybody, but I think somebody should pat themselves on the back if they think that I wrote about them, because I
Mm.
wouldn't do that to anybody.
Yeah, and I could tell. You're very respectful. Um, okay, last scenario. Let's say that a young writer comes to you, they have this story of something like Marcia, dark place, horrific things, and they say, I want to write about what I've been through, but I'm just scared that it'll be too much, like a trauma dump. What would Dawn do or say?
Well, the first thing I would say to them is go with it, because there are books written about everything, and there are enlightening books, there's gruesome books, there's middle of the road books that just tell stories. If they have a story to tell, I would tell them to go with it. And if they needed assistance, I would be willing to maybe sit and help give them ideas or clarify things, because I don't think anybody should hold back. I think if you have something to say, you need to say it, whether it's in a book or however they want to express themselves.
Yeah,
But yeah, I wouldn't tell anybody not to do it.
absolutely. I hope somebody out there is listening to this and takes that as a sign. Um, so Dawn, before I let you go for real, where can our viewers find you, connect with you, or read your books?
Okay, my books are on Amazon. I do not have a website, however, I am on Facebook under Dawn Roland, if anybody wants to get in touch with me. Um, I don't really, I'm kind of a quiet person. I'm not one of these people that really put myself out there. So I haven't created a website, even though I've had people want to try to create a website for me. But that means I'd have to be on there, getting on there every day and answering questions. And I don't know that like I said, I'm kind of a quiet, introverted person. So I don't know that I really want that. So if they want, they could contact me on Facebook, or like I said, my books are on Amazon and they can find them there. And
Thank
that's about
you.
all I can think of to tell you about that.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Yeah, so Without Family Ties and Unfathomable, quite different books, but they still capture pain, but also healing and resilience and dark period, but also kind of highlighting that there's still art and that there's still a voice and you can still get out of it. And again, Dawn, thank you so much for being so open. Thank you for spending your time with me, with us, with our viewers, and to our viewers. If you like this video and like this conversation, there are plenty out there in our channel. So make sure to subscribe, to like, and again, connect with Dawn. You barely catch her, so catch her on Facebook. And until next time, stay empathetic. And if you have a story, don't be afraid to tell it. Thank you again so much, Dawn. It has been a
Well, thank
privilege.
you.